Now that houses of worship are in the process of opening their doors again, government overreach and the threat of lawsuits are a real challenge. What steps do we need to be taking? What can government do to help it go more smoothly? We'll get answers from U.S. Senator Ted Cruz on how to keep the new normal from being one where our liberties are restricted. Hi, I'm Stuart Shepard, along with First Liberty President and CEO Kelly Shackelford. Hi, Kelly.
Hey, it's great to have Senator Cruz with us today. And, before I start, everybody knows who Senator Ted Cruz is, but a lot of people don't know your background, Senator, with us, which is a lot of people become politicians and all of a sudden maybe become new, supporters of religious freedom. That's not your case. You've been a warrior for religious freedom your whole life. And in fact, when you were one of the top lawyers in the country, you donated a lot of your time on some really big cases as one of our network attorneys with us. I remember us filing briefs at the Supreme Court and fighting for veterans and religious freedom. And so I just want to thank you as we start the interview for being a person who's a true warrior for religious freedom.
Well, Kelly, thank you. And it's truly been a privilege for the last 2 decades to litigate cases alongside you over and over and over again, fighting to defend religious liberty. It is a passion of my heart, and I know it is your life's calling. And the work First Liberty does is so important, standing up and fighting for our fundamental rights. And so I'm proud to play even a small part in assisting the tremendously important work you guys are doing.
Well, I can't think of anybody better to ask this question because everybody's thinking about this. I mean, you're not only a senator, but you've argued like 10 cases at the Supreme Court. You have a very extensive constitutional background, and everybody's watching what's the new normal going to be as regard to our freedoms. How would you lay out for people kind of the powers of what's going on? What is a proper balance? And are we in real danger of losing our freedoms in the new normal?
So I do think we're in danger of losing our freedoms, and it may be best to start with just some first principles. First of all, government clearly has the power to take reasonable common sense steps to stop an infectious disease. You go back to the beginnings of our country, the beginnings of our Constitution. If there was an outbreak of an infectious disease, government had the authority to take people and forcibly quarantine them. And quarantining someone is a severe act of police authority to prevent your movement, to isolate you. But it's long been, if there is a dangerous infectious disease, that has long been accepted as within the permissible sphere of government authority. Where the problem comes is on the extremes, when that power is abused. And we have been seeing instances all across the country where that power is abused. We have seen instances, for example, 2 weeks ago, I went up to your hometown, went up to Dallas to get a haircut. Now, getting a haircut is normally that big a deal, not that big a deal, but it so happened that I went to get a haircut from Shelley Luther. Now, as you know, Shelley is a local small business owner. She owns a hair salon. And she decided to open her hair salon because the women and men who work with her, they needed the money. They needed to provide for their family. So she opened the hair salon, and the local officials came down on her like she was Bonnie and Clyde. And she was prosecuted and sentenced to jail for 7 days in jail for the crime of cutting hair. Not only that, the judge, who is an elected Democrat, at her sentencing hearing, the judge demanded of her to apologize to the elected officials whose orders she had disobeyed. Now, I got to say, Kelly, who the heck does that judge think he is? This is America. Citizens don't apologize to elected officials. It works the other way around. We work for you, not, as sometimes some of these clowns seem to forget, the people working for the elected officials. Shelley ended up serving 2 nights in jail, which was a frightening experience for her. Thankfully, 2 things happened. One, the governor stepped in and modified his order to make clear that no one should serve jail time as a consequence. That was an important change. I'm glad the governor did that. And then two, the Texas Supreme Court stepped in and ordered her released from jail. And that was on a Thursday night, or Thursday afternoon, actually. And so Friday morning, I flew to Dallas, went up there to get my hair cut. And I did it, well, I hadn't had a haircut in 3 months because of the whole quarantine. So I was starting to look like the Bee Gees. You'll appreciate this, Kelly. Heidi told me that she thought another month and I would have a full-on mullet going. So the haircut was needed, but it was also meant to be a statement of thank you for the courage that Shelley showed standing up to an excessive abuse of power. And we've seen that pattern repeated over and over and over again. Crisis reveals character, and we are seeing the character, frankly, of some jackbooted authoritarians who are willing to abuse their power. It's one thing to put reasonable public health restrictions in place. It's another thing to arbitrarily trample on liberty, and that's where First Liberty, that's where so many who exist to defend the Bill of Rights and our freedoms has to step in and push back.
Let's move to the religious liberty side. Right before Easter, we had what I call the shot heard around the world, the lawsuit. There was all this crazy stuff you're describing. There was a father that was arrested in front of his children, put in handcuffs for throwing a baseball in a park, and a guy arrested coming off the beach. And everybody was wondering how we lost our system. And it was really the first lawsuit in the pandemic. We filed the one in Louisville. On behalf of the church that was told they couldn't have a drive-in service when they were in their cars on Easter. Yep. And we won just a really significant, the first case of its kind, and it was really strong too. And we're still having to fight those cases. We're now doing in-person church that's safe, and we're winning those cases around the country. But I just want you to talk about how you see the religious freedom battle, what you see, happening and maybe happening in the future. And then also speak to the importance of judges, because the judge in our case in Louisville was Judge Justin Walker, who I know is before you guys right now up for the D.C. Circuit position, and how important it is to have really good judges.
Well, when it comes to religious liberty, I mentioned that crisis brings out someone's character, someone's natural inclinations. We have seen, sadly, there are these politicians on the left who hate faith, who have a demonstrable antipathy to people of faith, to Christians, to observant Jews, to anyone for whom faith is anything real and tangible in their lives. And that's manifested, for example, Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York, repeatedly has demonstrated an over-eagerness, a zealousness to target people of faith. Several weeks ago, he put out a statement that said, if a church or synagogue meets, you risk being permanently closed down. Well, as you know, Kelly, no tin pot mayor has the power to permanently close down any church or any synagogue. And the fact that they are licking their lips trying to put a padlock on the church demonstrates that level of antipathy. And it's interesting, de Blasio keeps sending these tweets, in particular attacking Jewish people, observant Jewish people. That there was a funeral for a respected rabbi that people went to. As I understood it, they stayed 6 feet apart. They tried to observe the rules and be safe. And the mayor personally supervised breaking up the funeral. And then sent out a tweet directed to Jews that we will come after you. Now that, when that happened, I actually asked the Department of Justice to intervene and investigate, because that was starting to be a pattern of anti-Semitic action targeted at those who were observant Jews. The case you talked about in Louisville, Kentucky, very important case. There was a similar case also in Mississippi. In both instances, there was a drive-in church. People wanted to go to church, but they also wanted to be safe. They wanted to respect the public safety rules. And so the compromise they reached is, all right, well, let's drive in our cars. We'll leave the doors closed, the windows up, so we won't be within 6 feet of each other. And we'll listen to the pastor on the radio. And I have to say, that's actually a pretty ingenious way to be able to worship and also render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. It was, I think, a very clever solution. And in both instances, local authoritarians sent in law enforcement to go and ticket everyone for sitting in their cars. That's absurd. That is targeting and singling out people of faith because they are people of faith. And as you know, the very first liberty, as the name of your group acknowledges, the first liberty in the first clause of the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights is religious liberty. You don't get to single out and persecute religious faith and the exercise of religious faith. And that decision was important. I will say that case also, Justin Walker, the judge there, has since been nominated to the D.C. Circuit. I got to say, because of that case, Judge Walker, I'm confident will become a D.C. Circuit judge, if for nothing else because of that case, because he handled that case superbly, took on the issues, and not just resolved them in that case, but wrote an opinion that I think made clear to people across the country the stakes we are facing and that the Bill of Rights applies. Just yesterday, I read a letter that the Department of Justice sent to the governor of California that says the Bill of Rights is not suspended during a pandemic. And in particular, I mean, this is a great example. So California, apparently, they've decided all sorts of institutions can open up. They've decided bars could open up. They've decided massage parlors could open up. But they've decided churches, no, you can't open up. Now, it's one thing if you want to have a neutral rule for everyone that says any gathering more than 10 people or 50 people, given the state of the outbreak, large gatherings are suspended. That's at least facially neutral and much easier to defend as a policy if the medical science backs it up and the level of the outbreak. But when you start making exceptions, I'm sorry, there is no coherent constitutional argument that a massage parlor or a bar is somehow more protected, more constitutionally privileged, more sacred, more worthy of legal protection than a church service. If you need some good deep tissue massage in your lower back, you may well need some good deep spiritual massage as well from going to church and listening to the word, and you don't get to pick and choose and discriminate against discriminate against faith. I'm very glad DOJ sent that letter. I hope it will cause California to change their path.
Well, absolutely. That was a great letter. And there's just battles going on state by state. We've got governors who are saying that they're not going to allow churches to meet until a vaccine is found. I mean, just crazy stuff we're having to deal with. But the judges, I want to mention one other thing. There's a judge up now I know who's going through, you're on the Judiciary Committee, Corey Wilson, who you're well aware of, a great judge. But the backstory that many people don't know is there was another nominee for that spot who wasn't so strong. And we spoke up and did what we could, but the key to stopping the not so good judge and getting now the really good judge who's about to be, I think, confirmed is because of you and Senator Hawley and your willingness to stand up. So I just want to say thank you. People don't see what you're doing on the Judiciary Committee, but I think it's so important to the future of our country getting these great judges on the court.
Well, Kelly, thank you. And your work was very important with that judicial nomination. And I'll say to everyone watching that Kelly and I have been working together and working closely on these matters for 2 decades. I mean, we met back in 2000 at the 2000 Republican National Convention when Kelly and I were both working on the national platform together. And then that's when we first met and started dealing with each other. But we really started working closely together and we became friends 3 years later. When I came back to Texas and I was the Solicitor General of Texas, the chief lawyer for the state in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. And we began working on religious liberty cases one after the other after the other. So the Ten Commandments case in Texas, where we defended the Ten Commandments monument on state capitol grounds, I asked Kelly to help lead the amici in that case, the friends of the court that we brought in to support Texas. We won a landmark 5-4 victory at the U.S. Supreme Court. That sort of cooperation's been going on 20 years with the judge on the Fifth Circuit that he's talking about. This judge had a really problematic decision on religious liberty. Kelly and First Liberty focused on it, highlighted it, brought it to my attention, brought it to others' attention. I dug in deep. I sat down with the judge in question and spent probably 30 minutes pressing into the details, going through the briefs in that case. and it ultimately became sufficient that I wouldn't support him, other senators wouldn't support him, and so his nomination was drawn, and instead we've gotten what I think will be a much, much stronger and more reliably constitutionalist judge on the Court of Appeals. That's a battle First Liberty really led, and I was grateful to be a part of it.
As churches are beginning to open their doors, houses of worship are beginning to open their doors, one of the questions we'll face, and you've dealt with this a little bit, I'd like you to unpack it a bit more. How should government regard the church constitutionally as we go through this time to make sure that liberties are kept where they ought to be?
I would say with special sensitivity, recognizing that the Constitution protects religious liberty, that it is fundamental. We're a nation that was formed by men and women fleeing religious persecution. It is fundamental to who we are. The liberty of you or me or all of us to live our lives and to seek out with all of our hearts, minds, and souls the Lord God Almighty, to live according to our conscience, whatever our faith may be, whether we are Christian or Jewish or Muslim or atheist. That is your choice for you and your conscience and your heart and your faith journey. And that is a right and liberty that is protected and cherished. And government leaders, you know, the governor of New Jersey, an elected Democrat there, said a couple of weeks ago regarding one of the orders he was putting in, he was asked whether the order was consistent with the U.S. Constitution. And the governor's response was, well, that's a little above my pay grade. Well, no, it's not. To become governor, that governor of New Jersey, just like every one of his predecessors, put his hand on a Bible or whatever else he put his hand on, raised his hand, and took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States. And that oath means something. And part of what that oath means is defending religious liberty and not allowing it to be singled out, to be persecuted, to be treated in any way as a second-class citizen.
Senator, you've been gracious with your time. I know how busy you are right now, and I think you got some hearings, maybe even coming up on judges as we speak. But I want to ask you one last question. I think you probably know this is Military Appreciation Month. I'm not sure if you're aware, but we actually just had to send a letter to the Secretary of Defense because Mikey Weinstein and his group have filed all these complaints against chaplains for doing, the chapels are closed because of the restrictions. And so they're doing prayers and things over the internet, and they're complaining. And unbelievably, a number of these base commanders and others are shutting down the ability of chaplains to be chaplains. And so I'd love your comments for anything you would want to say to our chaplains, or I know you've been on the Armed Service Committee and you care about this issue. I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
So let me say a couple of things. Let me say to each of the chaplains that your mission is incredibly important. It's important now. Look, this is a time for the church writ large to step up and lead at a time of crisis, at a time when people are scared, where they're focused on life and death and their own mortality, when they're facing economic pressures. Now, especially the church, it's not bricks and mortar. It's not the walls of the sanctuary. I haven't been to my church in 3 months. We Zoom every Sunday morning, although I'm going very, very soon. I'm looking forward to, we're getting ready to go back and meet in person, which I'm looking forward to. But the church we're called to be the body of Christ. We're called to exercise the love of Christ and to preach the gospel. And as you know, the scripture says that if you are ashamed of him, he will be ashamed of you. Well, I don't want him to be ashamed of me. And I know that you don't either. And so to the chaplains who are ministering to the flock, so during pandemic, we started something with Heidi and I started with the girls, where every night we're reading typically 3 chapters a night from the Bible. We're reading it out loud. Even when I'm in DC, we're doing it over Zoom. And so we started just with Matthew chapter 1 and working through the New Testament. And we actually just last night finished the book of John. So we've made it through the Gospels now. And the last chapter of the book of John, as Jesus is getting ready to ascend, he turns to Peter and says, "Peter, do you love me?" And Peter says, Lord, you know that I do. And Jesus says, then feed my sheep. And 3 times he has that exchange. Peter, do you love me? Lord, you know that I do. Feed my sheep. That's the command we have. And so to the chaplains, I'd actually encourage you to read the last chapter in the book of John as a word of encouragement of what Jesus is telling you your responsibility to do is, which is feed his sheep. And there is nothing in the military code that silences your right, your responsibility to speak, to preach the gospel, to be a chaplain. There is a reason that we have chaplains. The Senate Armed Services Committee, year after year, I have written into law protections for the religious liberty of chaplains. That continues to be a deep passion. Kelly, I'm going to follow up with you as we have on so many others. If you know of specific bases and specific commanders that are restricting chaplains, I want to know, because we're going to get involved in that, because that is not right. That we cannot and will not be silencing chaplains. And if a commander is doing it, that commander is not following the law, and it won't stand.
Well, we'll definitely get you that information. But I just want to thank you. Thank you, number one, for giving your time today. But thank you, more importantly, even for your stance for the Constitution, for religious freedom, just your willingness to stand up no matter what the consequences for what is right. There aren't a lot of politicians like that. You're a rare one, and I'm really grateful to have you as my senator in the state of Texas, and wish you the best this week. And if we can ever help you, we always want to. God bless you.
Well, thank you, my friend. God bless, and keep doing what you're doing. Keep fighting on the front lines to defend our religious liberty. It matters tremendously, especially right now.
Kelly, the senator covered a lot of ground. What would you say to those who are making the tough decisions when it comes to reopening houses of worship and letting people back inside again? There are a lot of things that are on their mind. What's your advice as we start making tough decisions about how to navigate that?
Well, the good news is we've put a lot of this information online. People can go to firstliberty.org, and we have a whole section on COVID-19 and sort of what are your rights as a church, and specifically, what are ways to be safe and opening back up for in-person. We've already had to file lawsuits on that. We won a major lawsuit in Kentucky that was a statewide injunction protecting every church's right there to open back up for in-person services. We're going to do that where we have to. But the good news is, in most places, churches who want to can open up safely. And if they have any questions, call us. And then we're going to have to fight in some places, though, as Senator Cruz mentioned, there are some sort of petty dictators who love their new power, who want to keep the church closed. Some have said even until there's a new vaccine, maybe next winter or other. That's unacceptable. And we're going to have to fight in some of these other places. And so I'd encourage people, stay involved with that. Let us know if you see anything of those type of abuses. But realize there's a lot of freedom already that we're opening up, and you can get our information on our website.
And First Liberty has also sent a letter to Congress asking for protections for churches against frivolous lawsuits and just kind of slapback lawsuits. Tell us about that.
Yeah, there are already a lot of litigation going against, let's take an example, cruise lines. And this shows you the kind of danger that can occur and that churches are aware of, which is there's already a lawsuit or lawsuits against cruise lines from people who didn't even get the coronavirus. They just said that because the cruise line wasn't as safe as they wanted it to be and didn't do certain precautions, it's causing them mental anguish because they're scared. They were scared that they might have gotten it. So you can see how anybody can file a lawsuit for anything. Well, these churches who want to open up, you know, many of them can't afford those type of lawsuits, but it's really easy to go after them. You have, you know, people come to church, somebody leaves, they say, that church, they didn't follow that guideline that was in that state, 4 states over, that was in the footnote in section 4 of the guidelines. And then, now we bring a lawsuit. So what we have encouraged with Congress and with the White House is that they put the same protections in place for our churches, for our houses of worship, that they did for those who were serving in the medical community and in the equipment community for our PPE, the protective gear. What they said is, look, we're not going to allow normal lawsuits that you could have done that better. if you were grossly negligent or really willfully reckless, you can be sued. But other than that, these people who are trying to do the right thing, who are trying to help, we're going to provide a shield from those type of frivolous lawsuits. That's what we think should be done for the church and for houses of worship and for the religious nonprofits who are reaching out and feeding and caring for those in this key time.
Well, if you feel like it's important to defend houses of worship as they once again begin to open their doors, and if you agree that chaplains should be free to be chaplains, whether they're inside the chapel or online or pretty much anywhere that's proper and appropriate for them to be sharing their faith, we invite you to join with us and go all in with us here at First Liberty as we defend religious freedom.
Now is a key time. I mean, we're determining what the new normal is going to be for the future of our country, for our kids and our grandkids. We've won every single case we filed so far, and we've really been at the lead of this with regard to churches and houses of worship across the country. But we've got to have resources to make sure that we don't, I mean, we can't take everything. We're having to turn things away. We need everybody to jump all in. This is a great time to actually do some really good things for the future of our country. And the Lord has been very gracious to us so far in these victories. But we want everybody all in so that we come out of this thing at least as strong, if not stronger, because of new precedents for the future of our country.
All right. Kelly, thank you. And thank you for being a part of this fight and going all in with First Liberty.